Look at the interior of this Etruscan tomb. This is known as the Tomb of the Reliefs from the Cerveteri cemetery dated to about the 3rd century BCE from ancient Etruria. If you don't know who the Etruscans are, go back and watch our video on the Etruscan culture, and you can also check out our video on women in ancient Etruria. In this video, we're going to dive deeper into Etruscan funerary art. I'm Dr. Megan Lorraine Debin, and I'm an art historian, and this is Art Trippin Lecture Series. Hi, I'm Dr. Megan Lorraine Debin, and this is Art Trippin. Let's look specifically at the interior of the Tomb of the Reliefs. First of all, the tombs at Cerveteri are rock-cut tombs. These are circular mound tombs, and there are multiple barriers within each of these mound tombs, so an extended family would be buried inside. There is a wall built around the circumference of the tomb, and then the roofs are covered with grass, and there are doorways open at the entrance of the tombs. The base of the tombs are made from stone cut out from the ground, and they were really complex underground tombs that actually stretched out over several hundred acres. So this is a true underground city of the dead, a true necropolis. So if we go to the necropolis at Cerveteri, we can see tombs ranging from several hundreds of years, from the 7th century BCE all the way up to the 2nd century BCE. So hundreds of years of burials are taking place here at Cerveteri, and some of these tombs are rock-cut tombs. So here we're looking at one example. This is the interior of the Tomb of the Shields and Chairs. And again, this is all carved out of rock. So you can see what looks like a long bed, and then you can see flanking the doorway 2 seats or throne type chairs. If you look closely at this, you can see that these objects, the bed and the chairs and even the doorway, are all carved out of stone. And scholars believe these are actually replicas of Etruscan interiors of their homes. And if you look at the doorways specifically, you can see that they're sort of recreating the wooden post and lintel that would create the door frame itself. Even the chairs, the originals would be carved in wood, but these are carved in stone, perhaps because these are meant to last for all eternity. So the idea is that you have a recreation of your home that serves you and houses you in the afterlife. Let's look at one more example of one of these rock-cut tombs. This is the interior of the Tomb of the Reliefs. I really love this one because actually, if you look really closely at this, you can see carved all over the walls and pillars are basically everyday objects. Pictures, you can see ropes, you can see tools like shovels and a pickaxe. And if you look at this one pilaster, down at the bottom, you can even see a little cat stretching out underneath these objects that are sort of hanging on the wall. This kind of reminds me of the interior of my dad's garage with all of his tools hanging on the wall. And you can imagine that the Etruscans would have these objects. They would want to be buried in an environment that looks like their home and that has all of the important tools and accoutrements that you might need in the afterlife. So all of these objects, even the family cat, are here for all eternity in the interior of the Tomb of the Reliefs at Cerveteri Cemetery, dated to the 3rd century BCE. Let's move locations and we'll head to another site of Etruscan tombs. Here we are in Tarquinia, and we are looking at the interior of the Tomb of the Augurs from the Monterozzi Necropolis. This tomb is dated to about 520 BCE. Here we see on the walls of the tombs, instead of rock-cut sculptures, we see fresco paintings, and the paintings here depict what scholars believe to be the funerary games that would have been held in honor of the deceased. The deceased here wears a red cape, and you can see beside him 2 figures, nude male figures, who are leaning towards each other, engaged in some kind of wrestling or combat. And this is probably part of the celebration of the life of the deceased, that they would have games, sport, and music to celebrate this individual's life. And perhaps this athleticism that is depicted here also alludes to the strength and power of the figure who is buried here. In between the wrestlers and the figure of the deceased, you see this one gentleman who seems to be holding up a snake, and scholars believe that this figure may have been sort of an umpire or a referee, kind of watching over the wrestling match. On the other side of the 2 nude figures, we see a man fighting with a dog. And perhaps scholars believe this might be a precursor to the Roman gladiatorial games. Here we're still at Tarquinia, and we are in the interior of the Tomb of the Leopards. We see 2 leopard figures depicted in the top register underneath this very beautifully patterned ceiling. You can see a kind of checkerboard pattern, and you can see a central register with circles of varying shapes. You can see that they really had an eye for decorative imagery. So if you're into interior design or graphic design, pattern and textile design, you might be interested in looking more into Etruscan wall paintings. Here in the Tomb of the Leopards, we have these felines sitting above these figures. Perhaps these are protective figures, sort of like guardians watching over the funerary celebrations. Below the leopards, we have people lounging on these beds. These would have been wooden day beds with pillows, cushions, and fabrics laid on them. And then we see both men and women entertaining, feasting, eating food at the banquet, drinking wine, lounging about, chit-chatting. They're also being served wine. We see pitcher and cup bearers. And we also see musicians playing the harp, playing the flute, and we see dancers. So we see generally a mood of festivity and celebration. In fact, most of the Etruscan tombs depict a celebration of life. These are not somber contemplations of death, but vibrant celebrations of life. We don't know if this is what an Etruscan funeral looked like, but it could be likely. Or perhaps, are these depictions of Etruscan heaven? Do they think that when you go into the afterlife, it's the great big party and the great beyond? Could be. Well, since there are really no mythological scenes depicted here in this period of Etruscan art, we think that this probably represents some kind of reality, or at least an idealized reality of Etruscan life. And in fact, Greek writers wrote about the Etruscans, saying that they listened to music, they sang, and there's even a Greek writer who says that the Etruscans did everything to music. Their funerals were set to music, they played sports to music, and they even, according to this Greek writer, whipped their slaves to music. So yes, while I might romanticize and idealize the Etruscans, because I think it's great to see a culture that celebrates life, and I love to see a culture in the ancient world where women have more power than the norm, we must also reckon with the fact that they kept slaves, which of course is not a mark of an enlightened society. Now that being said, they did appear to be less warmongering than the Greeks and the Romans, And in fact, this was part of their downfall. They never unified into sort of one empire, and this kind of internal fragmentation and the lack of a unified standing army meant that with great ease, the Romans were able to conquer and absorb the Etruscans into the Roman Empire eventually. But we can see some examples of the sweetness, the gentleness, and the celebratory nature of Etruscan life in their funerary art. Here we are looking at the sarcophagus with the reclining couple. Here we're looking at a close-up of one of these that's in the Louvre in Paris. Now there are many of these that you can see at many museums around Europe especially. So this is a trope or a concept that's depicted over and over again in Etruscan art, where we see a male and a female figure reclining on a bed, perhaps partaking in some kind of celebration. You can see the influence of ancient Mesopotamian art and archaic Greek art in the way that the hair and the beards and the braids of the female figure are depicted. And you can also see in this example from the Louvre some traces of paint. So you can see a design that was painted on the woman's dress here. Here we see a depiction of a husband and wife lounging on the banquet bed. And this is the same kind of imagery that we see painted on the walls of the tomb. So the walls are painted with these scenes, and then the sarcophagus itself is a depiction of this scene where we can really see a kind of sweet, gentle, and loving interaction between this couple. And they are ostensibly going to be together here for the afterlife, for all eternity, celebrating together in the afterlife. So here we see the couple depicted kind of engaging lovingly with each other, and the man sort of has his arm around the woman in a really sort of gentle way, and they're also depicted smiling. So may we all be this happy for all eternity. So what do you think of Etruscan funerary art? We see lots of depictions of a joyful embracing of the pleasures of life, from music, eating, dancing, and drinking, to just hanging out with your loved ones. What do you think about the Etruscan afterlife? Does it look appealing? I feel like if heaven exists, it's definitely a party. Let me know in the comments what you liked. Let me know what you want to hear more about. If you like this video, please subscribe to Arttrippin here on YouTube. You can also find us on TikTok at Arttrippin and on Instagram at Arttrippin with Prof D. As always, I'm Dr. Megan Lorraine Debin, and this has been Arttrippin, the lecture series.